Alright, I'm going to spin that one because that cut out the glare. Alright, so I would like to take a couple of moments here now to go over the Obviosities packet that you should have completed for class today. Okay? So first off, looking at the very first page, a couple of things that should be filled in here on this one. So this should be from -1 to +1. This one should be from -1 to +1 also. We did those in class yesterday. Then you should have filled in the hammer. You got to get to know the hammer. Cosine squared of t plus sine squared of t is equal to 1. Cosine squared plus sine squared is always 1. Okay? Then we discovered, so then in number 3, you should have discovered the fact that cosine is positive in quadrants 1 and 4. It's negative in 2 and 3. Sine is positive in quadrant 1. Everything is positive in quadrant 1. Sine, cosine, tangent, cosecant, secant, cotangent. Everything's positive in quadrant number 1. And quadrant number 2 for sine, which means it's quadrant number 3. And quadrant number 4, it's negative. Excuse me. Okay. Then number 4. Now I think with number 4. Nope. Okay. Tap the brakes. Nope. Okay, we didn't do it. Okay. So then with number 4, you should have figured out that cosine is the same when you add or subtract 2 pi. Because if you think about it, if you're thinking about the unit circle, if I go another 2 pi radians, so if I'm here, okay, on my unit circle, and I go another 2 pi radians around in either direction, the positive direction or the negative direction, I've gone one more loop. I've gone one more lap around the circle in either direction, which puts me back at the exact same spot. So cosine is the same if I add or subtract any multiple of 2 pi. So if I add or subtract 4 pi, 6 pi, 8 pi, 10 pi, 98 pi. Okay? As long as I'm adding or subtracting an entire circle, I'm back at the same spot. For sine, for cosine, and for tangent. Okay. In number 5, you should have learned that if you go half of a lap around, so if you add a half of a circle to it, so that puts you on the opposite side through the diagonal, or through the diameter, through the center of the circle. So if I'm at pi over 6, plus another pi would put me at 7 pi over 6. I'd be on the opposite side of the circle. Well, that's going to oppositely affect my sine value, oppositely affect my cosine value, but do nothing to my tangent value. So this one should have been negative, oops, I got to change colors. This one should have been negative cosine of t. This should have been negative sine of t. And tangent stays the same. Okay. Because if you think about it, tangent on the other side would be negative cosine divided, or excuse me, negative sine divided by negative cosine, which is just going to be sine divided by cosine, which is the same. And then in number 6, we've talked about going the opposite direction. So if I go in the positive direction for a t-rap value, and then I go in the negative direction, that same t-rap value, some certain things are going to happen. First off, cosine is going to stay the same if you go in the positive direction or if you go in the negative direction. Your cosine value is going to stay the same. Sine is going to be negated. It's going to be the opposite because you're going the opposite direction. So that changes your sine value. Which then, that would change your tangent because tangent would be sine divided by cosine. So if we've got negative sine, so tangent then is also going to be opposite. Okay. So that is what you should have learned in class yesterday or last night when you were going through finishing up the packet. Then, now what I would like to do is I would like to spend the remaining time working on the very back page of that worksheet. Okay? So if you're given one of the trig functions, you're given all of the trig functions. Okay? Because you can figure them out. So if the sine of t is equal to 3/5, then I can use the hammer to find the cosine value as either positive or negative 4/5, depending upon if I'm in quadrant 1 or if I'm in quadrant 2, without any extra conditions or extra information given. Okay, we have to leave that as both positive and or negative. Okay? So then it asks, well then what is the value of the sine of negative t? Well, sine of negative t is negative sine of t. So that's going to be, if sine of t is 3/5, then that's going to be negative 3/5. Then it asks for what is the tangent of t. Tangent of t is the sine divided by the cosine. So the sine, this should have actually been, should have been 3 up there. On this one, is it 3/5 on yours or is it 2/5? 2, that should have been 3/5 there. Because the sine is 3/5. So 3/5 divided by plus or minus 4/5 is going to end up being 3/5 times 5/4, which is 3/4, and because it's plus or minus on the bottom, it becomes plus or minus 3/4. Sine of t plus pi is the same as negative sine of t, so then that becomes negative 3/5. Okay? All right? So now we've walked through that one. Now let's do this one. Cosine of t is 3/4. Right? Do you have 3/4 or do you have 5/13? 3/4? Okay, perfect. Okay? So 3/4. So in what quadrants could t be located? Cosine is positive. So which quadrants could t be located? 1 and what? 1 and 4. Yep, because cosine is positive. So that's going to be in quadrant 1 or quadrant 4. Okay. What is the cosine of negative t then? From number 6, which is the page right before this, we should have said that cosine of negative t is equal to the cosine of regular t, right? So what should it be? 3/4. Secant is what? In terms of, yes, but in terms of sine and cosine? 1 over cosine, right? Okay. So since it's 1 over cosine, that is 1 over 3/4, which is 4/3. Cosine of t minus pi is going to be negative cosine of t. So what is the answer to D? No. Negative 3/4. Cosine of negative t is equal to cosine, yes. But I'm looking for negative cosine of t. Okay. Sine of t. Well, how am I going to find sine of t? How am I going to find sine of t?
Hammer.
Hammer. Yep. So cosine squared plus sine squared equals 1. Cosine squared is going to be 3/4 squared so I got that. 3/4 squared 9/16. 1 minus 9/16. Did you do that in a calculator or did you do it in your head? What did you do in a calculator? So let's be good at doing it in our head because it's not that hard really. Okay. So 1 is how many 16ths? 16, right? So if I gotta subtract 9/16 from 16/16, I get 7/16. Is that my answer?
No.
Why not? I gotta get rid of the square. So how do I get rid of a square? I square root it. But then that brings in the plus or minus, right? So the sine then, here it goes. Thought I could get all the way through, but no. Didn't. 2 away. Oh yeah, that's right, I forgot to unplug this. then the sine of t is going to be plus or minus the square root of 7 over 4. Cotangent. Cotangent is what? Cotangent is what? Cosine over sine. Cosine was what? Negative 3/4 or positive? Positive 3/4. Sine was what? Dividing fractions, what do? Flip and multiply. So then this is going to be 3/4 times 4 over plus or minus the square root of 7, which is 3 over plus or minus the square root of 7, right? Do we like that? No, what do we like instead? You should be able to rationalize those denominators in your brain at this point in time. Okay? Questions on obviosities? Oh, wait, we got one more, don't we? Oh, no. Or do we? There's another one? Oh, yeah, we have more of these. More evaluates. Yeah, it was in the old packet. Have those. Okay? So now utilizing the unit circle, cosine at 2 pi over 3. Cosine is x's, right? Okay? So 2 pi over 3 is ring finger of the left hand. So cosine is above, so that's the square root of 1 over 2. So that's 1/2. But I'm on the next side, so this is going to be negative 1/2. Right? Cosecant of negative 2 pi over 3. Well, first off, cosecant is 1 over sine, right? Whoa, that's right, I forgot. I'm on the new, that one. So this is 1 over the sine of, really it's 4 pi over 3. Negative 2 pi. So if I go over here to my unit circle, if I go negative 1 pi over 3, negative 2 pi over 3. Okay. One of the things that you should have realized, or that you should obviosity realize, is that those two numbers, if I take the absolute value of those two numbers, they should add up to be 2 pi. The negative and the positive. If I make them both be positive, add them together, it should give me 2 pi. Okay? Every time. Okay? So 1 over.
But you're saying add the
4 pi over 3 and positive 2 pi over 3
Yeah.
gets me 6 pi over 3, which is 2 pi. Because if you think about it, no matter where you go, if you go in the negative direction, no matter where I go, the positive direction is going to complete the circle. So together they got to give me 2 pi, because that's a complete circle. Okay. So what's that? Negative square root 3 over 2. So that's going to be negative 2 over the square root of 3. So that's going to be negative 2 square roots of 3 over 3. Tangent of 9 pi over 2. Well, 9 pi over 2 is bigger than 2 pi, right? 4.5 pi, right? So take the 4 out, because that's two complete laps. So then this becomes the tangent of pi over 2. Pi over 2 is up at the top. Tangent is y over x. So that one's undefined. Sine of negative 7 pi over 4. That's going to be the same as the sine of what?
1 over 4. With.
It's going to be the same as what? Pi over 4? Yeah, not just 1 over 4, but 1 pi over 4, yep. Sine of pi over 4 is 2 over 2. Secant of 29 pi over 6. Well, 29 divided by 6 is what? Okay, so 4 and 5, 6, right? So that means that just gives me, this is really, I'm just asking for
5, 6.
secant of 5 pi over 6, right? Which is 1 over the cosine at 5 pi over 6. Which is 1 over negative square root 3 over 2. Which is the same as this one up here. So I already did that math. No need to do it again. Right? Utilize what you've done. We only got 16 choices for angles, right? And if you notice, all the fourths are the same. Okay? It's just a matter of if it's positive or negative. Okay? And then so really only got 4 options here. Okay? Negative 88 pi is the same as what? Which is the same as what?
Negative 4 pi.
Which is the same as just cotangent of 0? Right? Right? Because it's even. What if it was negative 89 pi? Then where would it be? This is something you should have picked up yesterday. That'd be a pi. How do I know when there's no fraction and it's just whole numbers of pi? How do I know where it is? So if it's even, it's at 0, right? And if it's odd, it's at 1 pi, right? Okay? So cotangent at that one, that's going to be x over y, right? So that's going to be 1 over 0. Did that math too already. And so that gives me undefined. Okay? So today we have a trig values worksheet number 2 that I will be handing out. Notice the color of the sheet, which means what?
You're turning it in.
It's due.